We've all heard the saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But there are those who believe that power does not corrupt. It's really fear that corrupts, specifically fear of losing power. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. We're living at a time when Sri Lankans are facing one of the most serious economic crises in the world. There are many Sri Lankans who don't have 3 meals a day. Now, you know all of this information, but how did we really get here? Corruption was one of the main reasons. And today we have allocated time on Face the Nation to discuss something that will help us reverse the effects or the ill effects of corruption that has gripped our country for so long. The recovery of stolen assets. We've got an expert panel, well versed in the subject, of course, brought right here to Stein Studios to discuss these matters and more. So without further ado, let's get to knowing our guest for this evening. On my far left is Attorney at Law Kaushalya Navaratna, former Secretary of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invite and coming on our show. On his left is Sankita Gunaratna, the Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for being on our show. We've also got no stranger to this show, Lihini Fernando, Attorney at Law, Council Member of the Morotua Municipal Council. Thank you very much, Lihini, for making your way back to Stein Studios to discuss these matters that affect the entire country. And finally, we've got Attorney at Law, Sudat Vikramaratna. He is the General Secretary of the Samagya Janabalawegya Lawyers Federation. A very good evening, sir. Thank you very much for coming on our show. Getting right to the issues, and of course, the format of the program goes where each panelist will be given time for an opening statement. A question will be posed to each panelist, following which the floor will be open for questions from our journalists. So to get right into it, first, Attorney at Law Kaushalya Navaratna. Sri Lanka, or Sri Lankans, moreover, are starting to lose faith in if asset recovery is even possible in Sri Lanka. For asset recovery to become a reality, first we need to identify the perpetrators, then we need to follow the paper trail, find the money, bring it back to Sri Lanka. You are a very, very senior counsel in Sri Lanka with a very, very good knowledge about the legal structure of Sri Lanka. Is the current legal structure of Sri Lanka compatible with this request come demand of the people?
Thank you very much for Shalan giving me the opportunity to come and discuss this. Perhaps one of the most debated topics in the recent past in the history of our country. So as far as this, the important topic is concerned, one would say there are certain legal measures that are in place. The question is, as you correctly pointed out, whether it is sufficient or sufficient enough to bring the culprits or the perpetrators to the books and to try before court and to have them punished. So if I just take you back to the little history of our country, when we say that we gained independence, because I'm very careful in picking my words. We say that we obtained, or rather we gained independence back in 1948. So we know that what was the situation of our country, and we were having one of the most powerful economies back then in 1948. Now what has happened after 75 years? We are in the verge of declaring our bankruptcy. So who is responsible for it? Is you or me? Of course, we are partly responsible because we have exercised our so-called franchise in favor of certain people who have ripped the entire country and the entire economy. That is the grievance. That is why people are just on the road. And for a long time, the people have not raised their voice. But since of late, and the general public has thought enough is enough, we must raise our voice, and then we must get to the ground and fight against the bribery, corruption, and it is a cancer which must be eradicated from the society. So it has come to that stage. So let me get back to some of the other nitty-gritties in what is being discussed now. But Sri Lanka is a country where we have been a signatory to the UN convention that has been established or rather enacted for the eradication of bribery and corruption, and to basically recover their stolen assets. We are a signatory. Now see what has happened thereafter in terms of some of the judgments in the Supreme Court, and it is necessary, it is imperative that the legislators to legislate the required statutes in Sri Lanka and to have it passed to the parliament in order to give full effect to the convention. Back in 2017, we made a vow in an international forum. Yes, we will pass the legislations and will give the full implementation for the UNS convention. Has that happened? Thus far, no. So who are the people who should pass these as the legislation? It is people who are in the parliament. So against whom these the main allegations have now been made by the general public, I don't have to basically make that public statement. It is just a matter of record. So Charlotte Jets, when you go back in 2015, there was a presidential task that was established that needed to investigate, freeze certain powers that were given to this presidential task force. Has that, is it operational now? God only knows. I don't think even the people who have been appointed to the commission, whether they are aware of the fact that there are still commissioners in those presidential task force. So it has become an absolute joke. I'm so sorry to use these terms in a public forum, because this is why the country that you use the very correct term, they have ripped the entire economy in the country. The people are finding it difficult to find 3 meals, to supply 3 meals. So this is the situation of the country. Why? So therefore, when you look at the entire legal structures, there are certain the legal provisions, statutory provisions in Sri Lanka, where it provides the freezing of certain assets. But when it comes to the high-level, high-profile the matters, I don't think that the legal framework is sufficient. Therefore, the time has come for us to revisit and reintroduce certain provisions with powers. Even we have the bribery commission to investigate bribery and corruption. So we know what's happening now. The actions are being filed. Sometimes on technical grounds, actions are being dismissed. Sometimes the people are being indicted in the High Court. Indictments are being withdrawn. Sometimes the indictments are getting dismissed. The people are getting acquitted. It doesn't mean, does that mean that they have not done anything wrong? I don't think so. It's just that then there is something radically wrong in the whole process. And we have to see to it that the loopholes are properly addressed to. And if you look at certain other countries like United Kingdom, USA, the Switzerland, you must see the manner in which these provisions have been implemented, how they have established these the institution which cannot be controlled by the politicians. They are completely independent. Powers are given. So when the powers are given, and when even the commissioners or the people who are in the commissions or the institution, they have absolute no power, absolute no fear. They are fearless. When you are fearless, when you know that nothing will happen and the system itself will protect you, then certainly they can discharge their duties without favoring anybody. But when it comes to the system in our country, you would see, and people, they get appointed, the duties which you are supposed to do is not being done, and that is perhaps one of the reasons as to why we are in this very precarious situation, not only economically. Even if you look at all segments in the society, there's a complete outcry, complete downturn. So therefore that it is, I would say, an imperative to revisit the entire system and then to bring new laws, not merely bringing new laws, the laws which can be properly implemented with, and the institution must be properly established, where the people must be given proper the training. They must basically properly train, and they must be given the due exposure, perhaps with the international institutions.
And most importantly, though, Mr. Navaratna, protection. That really caught my mind. We will get into a discussion on this because usually the experience as far as Sri Lankan officials go is the officials who do right by the law, the officials who do right by the people, are the ones who suffer the worst persecution come the change in government. Thank you very much, sir. We will get into those discussions in the coming rounds of Face the Nation today. Up next, I move my attention to Sankitha Gunaratne, Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. Sankitha, Transparency International is an international organization or affiliated with an international organization. You liaise, of course, between the people on the ground here in Sri Lanka and the international community. There are international standards on how corruption can be done away with. Then there is the form of corruption that we see here in Sri Lanka. However, recently, the former Finance Minister, President's Counsel Ali Sabri, made a statement and said, one of the main reasons for the economic downfall in the country was the fact that even members of the cabinet were not aware of the economic situation in the country. However, many of these responsible officials failed to mention the contribution of corruption. So what was it? Was it negligence or corruption? Your time starts now.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks for having me as well. I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think it's very clear across the country that corruption has certainly been a contributory factor to the downfall that has happened that we are experiencing right now. So as you might be aware, Transparency International Sri Lanka, along with 3 other petitioners, we are in the Supreme Court right now, where we have asked for accountability for the economic crisis that has hit Sri Lanka. We have asked the Supreme Court to look into the decisions that were made to peg the dollar at 203 rupees, the decision to pay our foreign loans on the 19th of January, I believe, from our foreign reserves, from our dollar reserves, the decision to to reduce corporate taxes in 2019. So an entire spate of decisions that were made that actually led to the economic downfall Sri Lanka is currently experiencing. So we think of corruption usually as financial crime or something involving a bribe or a tender process being manipulated, but it's not necessarily just that. We need to also think of the enabling types of corruption that take place. It might be conflict of interest, it might be nepotism, it might also go so far as what we call state capture. So state capture is a particularly insidious form of corruption that basically means that the arms of state, so the institutions of state, policies of state, that laws, etc., and institutions as well, are abused for personal gain and not used in the public interest. So we have posed that question, we have made that allegation against several of the respondents, including our former president, former finance ministers, former prime minister in the Supreme Court, asking for accountability, stating that the fundamental rights of citizens have been violated by these actions, because we can talk till kingdom come about what was the cause of this, but this actually is an instance where the Supreme Court has now given leave to proceed in this case, where the Supreme Court has not only gone, has actually gone not a step beyond, but in the same order has instructed the Auditor General to provide Supreme Court with all of the information and the decisions and recommendations that were made by the Monetary Board, the Central Bank, etc., that led to these particular decisions. So we generally, as the people, not us per se, but our society has a massive distrust of politics, and so this is a unique instance where what usually would be in the province of the politicians and what we feel are very opaque systems are now about to be put to the test and about to be objectively scrutinized by the Supreme Court, which is the highest judicial authority of the country. So we're looking forward to actually seeing that case proceed. We've covered a few aspects, but to your direct question of was it corruption, was it inefficiency, I think it's all of it combined. It's not purely corruption, but clearly we now are beginning to see that corruption doesn't just happen behind closed doors under the table, greasing of the palms. These are the kind of surreptitious language you use. We all have got used to using to describe corruption, because we don't see a connection between that kind of corruption and our day-to-day lives. But unfortunately, in the past few months, we have really seen corruption come home to roost. So much so that, as Ms. Navaratna was saying, we, and you yourself were saying, we can't afford to eat anymore. The citizens of this country, the children of this country are malnourished. So it's unfortunate that we had to learn such a difficult lesson, and it's going to take years for us to recover from it. But we're now beginning to see, though, that we're all part of this system, and we need to ensure that corruption doesn't happen at the smallest level in order to ensure that it doesn't translate to the bigger decisions of the country that we contribute to, or even tolerate, or sometimes even enable through our vote. So no simple answer. We can get into it further.
Sankita, just one additional question. You, of course, the fact that Transparency International has taken these matters to the Supreme Court, it really empowers the citizens who, at a time when they can't find food to eat, they sit back and wonder, when corruption is happening in broad daylight, what can we do? I mean, I'm struggling to find food. How can I hold politicians or these people who have so much power over the state, power over me? How can I hold them accountable? So on that front, of course, kudos to Transparency International. But what sort of relief are you praying for?
So the major relief we have asked for is for the Supreme Court to hold in the prayer that the fundamental rights of the citizens of this country have been violated, including the right to information and the right to freedom of expression and the right to equality, of course. But in addition to this, we have requested the Supreme Court to appoint a committee that would review all of these decisions that were made, and if the committee were to find that certain decisions were illegally or unlawfully made, then for the Supreme Court to direct the Attorney General and other relevant law enforcement authorities to take action against those responsible.
Thank you very much, Sankita Gunaratne, Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to the two politicians, or the two politically affiliated members of our panel, of course, both from the Samagi Jana Balawegaya. But up first, I'd like to pose a question to Attorney at Law Sudat Wickramaratne, the General Secretary of the Samagi Jana Balawegaya Lawyers Federation. Sir, people have lost hope in the political establishment of the country as a whole. That is quite evident in the manner in which the people rose up against the political authorities and did what they did a few months ago. As far as the Samagi Jana Balawegaya Lawyers Federation go, I believe the Samagi Jana Balawegaya might already be making plans on what sort of promises they are trying to make at the next election. The promise of recovering stolen assets, the promise of holding corrupt officials, corrupt politicians to account, has been made many times in the past. Is it going to be a same kind of promise that will be made at a future election, or are you going to do something different?
Yes, it's a very pertinent question. Actually, there were political leaders who were not corrupted earlier. That was, we'll take D.S. Senanayake, Dudley Senanayake, Sir John Kotalawala. Likewise, there were leaders in this country. So we hope, actually, our leader is also non-corrupted person, and he got a good team.
You hope that he's not corrupt, or do you know that he's not corrupt?
He is not corrupt.
Okay.
He is not corrupted. There are no allegations as such, and he got a good team. Actually, according to our law is well equipped. I must say there are altogether 7 acts, namely Bribery Act, Declaration of Assets and Liabilities Act, then Offences Against Public Property, Prevention of Money Laundering, Finance Transactions Reporting, Commission of Investigation of Allegations of Bribery and Corruption, and Penal Code. So likewise, under the Criminal Procedure Code, police are well equipped under section 107 to 127. They are empowered to investigate and report to courts about the corrupted work, and not that is the police part, and in addition to that, there's a commission which was established in 1994 by the Act number 6 of 1994, where the sole authority was given to the Bribery Commission, and they have separate unit to investigate. So actually, under section 27 of the evidence ordinance, the goods or the stolen articles could be recovered by police. And it is well established law in the magistrate court as well as in the high court that those articles or the productions which were recovered on the information given by the suspect can be taken as evidence in courts. So likewise, only problem is this mechanism is not working, as you said, because of the corrupted people or the politicians who were governing this country and who are governing this country, because of the pressure they put to the officers of the police department and the bribery and corruption commission, those cases are failed in courts.
But Mr. Wickramaratne, we're not talking about a stolen car or even stolen rupees. This money has been converted into foreign currency. They've been stashed off in other countries. Are the provisions of the Criminal Procedure Code, as you mentioned, sufficient?
Yes, of course, in the Criminal Procedure Code, the police can investigate. Only the problem would be then we have to file the case in Sri Lanka and get an order from court to recover those monies which were sent to foreign countries. So actually the problem is, though we are talking here every law point, but the main issue is the power. Suppose, that's why I said we need a leader. We need a leader who is patriotic and who can order to make investigations, proper investigations by the police department as well as the bribery commission.
Yeah, but Mr. Wickramaratne, let's take one case on point. The bond scam. Apparently, according to the statements that are made on the political stage right now, there has never been a bond scam. No one is wrong. Everybody is right. Things have gone all hunky-dory during the past few years. But in the bond scam case, when a warrant was issued for the arrest of the former governor of the central bank, Arjun Mahendran, discussions were being held with Singaporean authorities on his extradition, but we don't really have an extradition treaty with Singapore. So on enforcement of these orders of court, Sri Lankan courts don't have jurisdiction in foreign countries. How do you do it?
Yes, actually I must start it from the very beginning. Now this bond scam was investigated by the CID, and the brief was handed over to the Attorney General, and there in the High Court the suspects were indicted. So where the Attorney General signs the indictment. So what has happened at the end of the day? The defense has taken up an objection that the indictment cannot be, charges cannot be framed against a legal personnel. There is a company. So on that ground, it failed. But as far as your question is concerned, if the suspect is at large, then there's a section in the Criminal Procedure Code where you can lead evidence and have the judgment, have the court proceedings ex parte, even in the criminal court. Without the accused, you can get the judgment, and thereafter open warrant could be issued, and thereafter it could be executed.
But Mr. Wickramaratne, you really didn't answer my question. What sort of difference is your promise going to be this time around? Because is it going to be the same old, we're going to catch corrupt politicians, we're going to bring back the money, 1,000 promises, and then just a very few really materialize?
Yeah, that was the past. But present, I understand our leader has already given a solemn promise that he will appoint one of the key members of the party as a Minister of Defense, and he will give the authority, because he will he will give the authority, and he will not give time to interfere, or he will not give the opportunity to the other politician to interfere with the investigation. That is the most important thing. If the proper authority is given to the police, CID, or the bribery commission, they will definitely do their job.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wickramaratne. We will get into more discussions as the program progresses. Finally, for the opening statement, Lihini Fernando, Attorney at Law, member of the Moratuwa Municipal Council. Lihini, out of everybody present here today, you are a representative of the people. People have elected you into office, and you, of course, have a responsibility to do right by the people. Lihini, you are a part of one of the smallest governing bodies here in Sri Lanka now. When we speak about large-scale corruption, we say it's difficult to catch the large fish, or as the saying goes. As far as local government authorities go, what is the situation like? Is it any better? Is it much worse?
First of all, thank you for having me here today, Sharon. So, getting into the context of local government authorities, I would say it is no different to the scenario that is in Parliament. You get the big fish there, and then you get the little fish at the bottom. The corrupt culture is prevalent right around, I would say. Because here the issue is now, I'll give you a few examples. We have the audit reports that come out every year. And if you go through those audit reports in detail, you can see major starking errors and differences, how they're not compliant, the accountability, the deficiencies, how tax amounts are not collected, how the accounts are not kept in line with the accounting standards, then the faulting of collections, then the rebates that have been given. So, you know, these are just audit reports that come out, and we debate in council, but then what action? It's just the Auditor General on a year-on-year basis he presents. And also the cadre, if you take how many people have been recruited outside the cadre, and then how those salaries have not been reimbursed by the central government, yet they continue to recruit. So the local government, the local council, I would say, is far more corrupt, and the network is so established in such a way that they are the mechanism, they are the conduit for the people at the top. Because, you know, certain monies are passed down for road constructions, development, and these commission structures are somewhat diverted to the central party structures. For example, I'll give you an example. If you take allocate 1 million for road construction, today actually they will construct about, you know, they will spend about around 700,000 for construction, and the rest goes as commission. And who benefits from it? That's the reality. I mean, the issue in this country is we have the systems, we have the processes, but then who, the law enforcement authorities, the accountability, the transparency, that is never in place. That we see at the top, even at the parliament level. We see the COPs, the COPAs, the Committee on Public Finances, we see them coming, talking it out, questioning, but what action is it taken? I mean, the law is there, the bribery acts are there, the Financial Reporting Act, the Money Laundering Act, but when it comes to actual implementation, taking effect, it doesn't take place. So all in all, this all boils down to the political culture of this country. The politicians who sit in those places, do they actually have the political will to eradicate, or I would say to curtail, to control corruption in this country? Because the basis in this country for anything is corruption. Today people come out and say, why do people want to be politicians? Because they think it is the fastest, the quickest way of getting rich. They don't want to go through the right way, but they go through the shortcut. Why do people do this? I mean, for example, you take local councillors, how many of them earn through illegal means? What is the salary of a local councillor? You take the salary of a parliamentarian today, and you will see the lavish lives that they are actually living in. I'm sorry, I have to say this. Look at the lives, the luxurious lives that they are living in. Look at their children who are studying overseas. Look at the foreign trips that they take. Can they maintain this kind of a lifestyle with the salaries that they take? I mean, you audit every, if we are really concerned as a country to come out of this crisis, the first thing that we should do is to get all these people's assets made public. Asset declaration should be made public. And you need to audit all these politicians from right around, from the top to the bottom. Everybody is responsible for this particular situation of this country. This country didn't become bankrupt or poor overnight. Somebody is responsible for it. Who is responsible? Are the people in this country, are people like us responsible? Are we the people who took decisions? Are we the people who took bribes? Who is responsible? Who is going to bring these people to task? So these are things that, I think the hard facts which the people need to question. I think during the Aragalaya, they came, one of the fundamental factors that they brought forward was give us our stolen money back. And I think that cause is still there. And I want to say this, one of the things, Sri Lanka needs an independent director of public prosecution. We see this globally, we see in most of the Commonwealth countries, a director of public prosecution, and that needs to come. Why I say this is, the Attorney General today is the advisor to the government, as well as the Attorney General is the person who will prosecute. There is a conflict there. No offense, the law takes effect, but we need to see it beyond. If we are really interested in bringing justice to this country, these kind of hard measures has to be taken. And sadly, it is the politicians who sit in this parliament who has to make these decisions. But I think the time has come for public pressure, to put further pressure to pass these laws, and I think it is of paramount importance.
Thank you very much, Lihini Fernando, for that opening statement. And with that, we open the floor for questions. Of course, I've got on my left Shania Dedigama, and on my right, I've got Senitha Senanayaka. Of course, the saying goes, ladies first, but Senitha has been specifically preparing and he's got some questions. So I think you don't mind, Shania, if I hand over the floor to Senitha for the first question by our journalist today.
Thank you, Shalan. My question is to you, Attorney at Law Sudat Wickramaratne. Mr. Wickramaratne, you're the General Secretary of the SJB Lawyers Federation. A while back, the SJB Lawyers Federation filed a complaint to the United Nations with the signatures of 1,000 lawyers. And when we're talking about recovering stolen assets, it's important to understand what are the mistakes we did, what are the mistakes we made in the past. Now, for example, in 2015, when the good governance regime came into power, they promised to, like Shalan said before, they promised to recover these assets back. But the national organizer of the SJB Lawyers Federation himself has said that they did not take steps to fulfill that promise. Can you tell us what went wrong there?
Actually, what happened was the president was from one party and the prime minister from another party. And from the very beginning, they had their own disputes. So thereafter, you may see, after some time, the Prime Minister, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, was chased away, and Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa was appointed as the Prime Minister. Though I don't want to name these people, but anyway, since you have asked this, so they have their own disputes with them. That was the main problem. And though the political leaders gave solemn promises, especially His Excellency the President at that time, Mr. Maithripala Sirisena, he could not actually get the arms of the law and get the police and especially the bribery commission to act and get the culprits arrested. So in Sinhala it says, Horuallan Anduwa, Andu Apu Anduwa, Horualluwa. So that's what was the common people were saying. So that did not actually, the promises were given, the former president as well as the former prime minister, they could not have a common footing on that, and that was the main issue for these non-compliance of the promises.
Thank you. And this is a very complicated topic, and I want to pose my next question to you, Sankitha. The Transparency International has said in order to properly recover stolen assets, it will take a long time, 10 years. Can you just elaborate what do you mean by this?
Sure. Asset recovery we can just functionally break it up into two parts. One is the local asset recovery, domestic asset recovery. So when we talk about proceeds of crime locally, and then we can look at it as international asset recovery. So if you look at it as two parts, Mr. Vikramaratne already talked about some of the provisions for local asset recovery that can also be used in an instance of international asset recovery. Now, the international asset recovery provisions that we need in Sri Lanka are supposed to be based on the convention that Mr. Navaratne talked about, which is the UN Convention Against Corruption. That has chapter 5, which is on specifically asset recovery. In Sri Lanka, we don't have one consolidated or composite piece of legislation that deals with the issue of asset recovery. So in 2018, there was an exercise by the previously mentioned Presidential Task Force on Stolen Asset Recovery. A multi-stakeholder forum was brought together to create a framework for a future law on asset recovery. And this was called a framework for a Proceeds of Crime Act, or a POCA. Now, this provided for more powers for the police and other law enforcement authorities, including, say, from the Forest Ordinance to the Customs Ordinance, and the CID, possibly the FCID, all of the Bribery Commission, all of those. In addition to that, it provided for law enforcement coordination. Now, we know Section 17 of the existing Siabok Act, that is the Bribery Commission Act, forbids or is perceived to forbid the Bribery Commission from sharing information about an investigation that they carry out with even a different law enforcement agency. So you would find the CID or the FCID, when it was in existence, doing parallel investigations to the Bribery Commission without coordinating. This is a huge issue when it comes to asset recovery. So this law sought to provide, the policy framework for the law sought to provide for this. Another issue we come across when it comes to international asset recovery is the issue of coordinating with foreign jurisdictions. So I can go to the routes to asset recovery very quickly later. So in order to be able to coordinate also, what was foreseen was a proper centralized authority that would have the expertise to be able to do that, and the empowerment to be able to do that. In addition to that, you find, imagine if you look at the conversation around tax that's happening right now, people don't believe that the taxes will be used in the public interest, right? So it is the same when it comes to asset recovery. Say we refer to the Airbus case, right? Say the $116 million were to be recovered to Sri Lanka right now. Do people have faith that it will be used in the public interest? It's very unlikely that it will. So there is this risk of re-corruption. So in order to be able to prevent that, there were provisions foreseen that would ensure that such monies would go into a trust set up parallel to the consolidated fund that would be monitored by civil society, by multiple stakeholders, to ensure that it's used in the best interest of the people, to ensure that there is sustainable development, to ensure that the victims of the corruption, the people that the money was originally stolen from, if it was a road construction contract that was supposed to benefit a particular locale, then you would make sure that the recovered assets would be used to compensate that victim group. So this law foresaw setting up a proper asset recovery mechanism and an asset management mechanism. If you look at examples across the world, what kind of assets do stolen like money turn into, right? It could be a yacht, it could be a company that is carrying on. To use an actual example, there was a company that was had a shipment of fresh fish, right? And the asset was seized by the relevant law enforcement agency, but the law enforcement agency didn't know how to manage this asset, so the entire shipment was ruined. There was an instance of a very valuable snake that needed to be kept in a diamond snake or something, that needed to be kept in sub-zero temperatures. But so you need a particular skill set to be able to manage an asset. We saw in the past few years cars being, taped or just covered and kept under a tarpaulin somewhere. So that is not proper asset management. So those are the things we need, the elements we need to think of when you think about asset recovery. But if you think about the routes to asset recovery, it sounds really complicated, and it can be. And why we say it takes a long time is because it usually involves multiple jurisdictions. So of the 4 routes to asset recovery, the first one is one where the executive of the origin state, that is the country that the assets were stolen from, would set in motion a law enforcement process that would then politically ask for assistance from a destination state, right, where the assets are now, right? And then you would coordinate with them and bring back the assets. Now, this kind of process, as Charlene referred to at the beginning, takes a really complex route. Money can be taken through secrecy jurisdictions, through, say, it could be Panama, to the Cayman Islands, to the Seychelles, to the UK, to New York, to Sydney. All of these countries end up actually harboring a lot of illicit finances. So that is one route that can be taken, that is coordination between the origin state and the destination state. A second route is where there is proceeds of crime in a particular state. Say, you can take the US as an example, or France. Say we take France as an example. Then the law enforcement agencies of France, if they are tipped off about stolen assets or proceeds of crime having been converted into a house or a yacht or something like that, then those law enforcement agencies can proceed against the property itself, not necessarily the person. You can also proceed against the property without thinking about the person's liability. So on a kind of civil standard, you could prove that. The third route is where civil society in destination jurisdictions file action and go after. And the fourth and political route is for destination countries, or countries, not necessarily destination countries, countries where there are assets that could be related to kleptocrats or people who have squandered finances from their own jurisdictions. There can be sanctions imposed against such individuals or even corporations. So when sanctions are imposed, assets like that are frozen, and then you can proceed to the next stages of asset recovery. So these are 4 routes, but we can get into more detail.
Sangeeta, I think you gave quite an elaborate explanation for that question posed by Senitha. But just on that, well, there are ways that assets can be recovered, because most Sri Lankans have just lost hope, saying that, there are not enough processes. We heard statements like there aren't enough laws. But I'd like to pose this question to Attorney at Law Kaushalya Navaratna. Now, when there are so many avenues available, you have been a member of the legal community in Sri Lanka. You have seen governments come and go. Do you think, in your assessment, that the current political establishment in this country has the political will to do that?
Yeah, because I can give you a very short answer to start with. It's no. But let me elaborate on this, Charlene. Now, I think we just made our opening statements, all 4. And one is, what is the common sort of a concern that was expressed by all of us? If there is any sufficient system or a framework, statutory laws in place in Sri Lanka, then of course we need not have had this the discussion here today. Because just as a member of the legal community, how I look at it in a slightly different way with an open mind. When I look at the legal framework, what is in place, and the statutory provisions in place, and the most important, the political will of the politicians. But of course, certainly, and it is my personal view that the new laws will have to be implemented, because I think you asked previously certain questions with regard to the political leadership, whether they will take steps. Why do you want to depend on the political leaders? If you have a proper legal framework, when if someone is guilty of bribery or a corruption, or if he can be found guilty for the siphoning of public funds, do you need the political leaders to come and give the leadership? No. If you have a proper legal system, the legal system itself will take the normal course, and you can take the matters. Now, she correctly pointed out, when you go to foreign jurisdictions, even the legal society, I mean the society itself, or perhaps an individual in the society, or a group of people, they can initiate legal proceedings against for the recovery of the stolen vessels. That is the level of standards in the forest jurisdiction. That is what is that we are crying for. At least even if we can't go up to that level, at least certain legal framework must be put in place. If not, we have absolutely no future. So that is the concern. So if I am to give a sort of another explanation to this, Shalan. So now I said in my opening remarks, we have been a signatory to the UN, the convention. So in terms of our law, and that requires that the proper legal, the statutory provisions must be implemented through the parliament. And for the last 20 or 25 years, it has not happened. We are a signatory. The pledges have been made before international forums, but no proper steps have been taken to give proper effect to these conventions. So that is why, in the recent part, you would have seen, even at the international level, before international forums, the concerns have been raised, demanding the government, so the requesting the political leaders to take proper steps, and that is for the recovery of the, not only for the stolen assets, even to bring to books the people who are liable for the present economic crisis in the country. Why? So we have made pledges, but we have kept our word. So that is perhaps the reasons as to why now the general public has realized enough is enough. Therefore, we must now put pressure on the governors, the people who are in power. And mere putting pressure is insufficient. We must do little more. So I mean, whatever the things what you witness in the recent past, perhaps due to these agitations, the people have lost trust. The people have lost confidence. It's just that I would say, as a member of the legal community, we have a good legal framework, provided we give enough power. Now, she spoke about the Commission of Bribery and Corruption, and there are other the laws which are in place. But what has happened? Has that brought any expected results? No. So then there's something lacking in it. If there's something lacking in it, it is now, not perhaps another 10, 15 years down the line. We have to act quickly. We have to see to it that these the required provisions are properly implemented, brought into our law, and it is properly executed. Otherwise, in the years to come, I think perhaps 10, 15 years down the line, again we might have to sit down and think what has happened 10 years ago, the 15 years ago, perhaps 100 years ago, from the time that we claim that we gained independence, now where we are. So therefore, that if you look at the country like the Singapore, the famous the Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, he analyzed back in 1960s. What did he say? If you want to basically if you want to be a developed nation, the first thing we must do, we must eradicate the bribery and corruption. He did it. Perhaps there may be certain the matters where the people have different opinion, but where now look at, now we all know Lee Kuan Yew's book, he says back in 1960s, they wanted the Singapore to be like a Sri Lanka. Now look at where the Singapore is, now what has happened to Sri Lanka. So that is the level. Why? And now she pointed out a good example. And what has happened to a commissioner or ambassador in certain country? He wanted to take a place on rent or to purchase a property to house the Sri Lankan mission. What has happened? They found out, and he was prosecuted and he was punished. Has the Sri Lanka or the Sri Lankan system has taken in steps against him? Thus far, no. And very recently, an Australian some investors, and they have bribed some locals in Sri Lanka to gain some the contracts. They found out, they were prosecuted. But back in Sri Lanka, nothing has happened. So we think that it is kind of a normal thing. Therefore, no kind of, the law should not basically punish them. So that can't happen. So that is why I say you must have a proper legal framework. When you have a proper legal framework, the political authority or any other person need not fork their fingers into it. When the system is in place, when the prosecutors and when the people who are involved in the system, when their safety is guaranteed, certainly that will itself will take the normal course, and these perpetrators will be tried and punished. So that is the type of a framework as a legal member of the legal community that I'm looking at.
Lihini, you're one of the career politicians here. Now, what we see in Sri Lanka is we don't see too much talk about corruption now, because I remember quite distinctly before the government of good governance came into power in 2015, there was a broad discussion on corruption and how certain roads were constructed at such a cost, where it could have been constructed with maybe even gold slabs. There was a huge discussion on corruption. After the 2015 election, come the 2019 election, it was all about, national safety, protectionism a little bit more. Those were different talking points, because this whole idea of corruption really died down. Now again, we see the ill effects of corruption that have been taking place in Sri Lanka since the time of independence. But there is not much discussion of these matters on the political stage. Here and now, you'll get some politicians slinging mud. But when you look at the news, at least, you can see that everybody, at least in the highest echelons of government, act as if nothing really happened.
That's a sad part. Now, in 2015, when the good governance, when they came, one of the key factors was this whole concept of independent commissions. Now, just adding to what Mr. Navaratna said, the authorities, yes, must take force, but when with the 19th Amendment, all these independent commissions that were brought in, it was completely reversed by the 20th Amendment. It was no longer those commissions were independent. So now what? Now, the authorities must take center stage and they must perform their duties. But here we see the political mechanism, the political machinery getting involved in the whole thing. And in terms of those independent commissioners, how they were appointed, it was all political at the end of the day. Then does the independence that we expect still suffice, which is a question. And now here we are, today we are talking about, the political machinery, but at the end of the day, it's the politicians, the political will needs to be there in this country for these things to take center stage. I mean, corruption is a it has gone into unprecedented levels in this country to such an extent that we cannot, this country today, I mean, everything at every end is corruption. So this is the problem, I would say. So who ends it? Who puts an end to it? So the whole mindset from a career politician point of view, I would say the next objective of the people who come to power should be to eradicate, to say no corruption in this country, because this country will never go forward if with that corrupt mindset. Because at the end of the day, here what the people think is, okay, you're in the government system, you can do something and get away. That is the mindset. We have the authorities, we have the law enforcement authorities in this country. But actually, when it comes to implementing, when it comes to investigation, does it take place? Now, I can give you a good example. Last week, the members of this Samagi Taruna Balavegya, we made a complaint to the Bribery Commission 2 years ago on the sugar scam, and then it's 2 years since we made the complaint, and we went again last week just to check on it, and nothing has happened to this date. I mean, they have not done any fact reporting. Have they called the people who are responsible? I mean, we filed the complaint with the relevant facts. Have they been brought into questioning? So here we have the law enforcement authorities. Why aren't they taking action? And
but Lini, what can you do? So you went to the Bribery Commission, you asked them, what have you done? They said, no, we've not done anything. What next?
I mean, then we have to either go back to court and Court of Appeal and then file a writ against the authority. What? I mean, this is what I'm saying. Whose agenda are these authorities operating? I mean, these are independent officials who are supposed to take
But not anymore, right? I believe the Bribery Commission now is under the President.
After the 20th Amendment, and then this whole 22nd Amendment and the whole discussion came.
But the 22nd Amendment is still in the pipeline.
So what I'm saying is this: at the end of the day, you take the whole Pandora Papers. the presidential committee was appointed to investigate. Even to this date, what is happening? Who is talking about it? So at the end of the day, the sad part is everything boils down to the political machinery. Do the politicians in this country actually have the will to prosecute? Are they with the mindset that we don't want a corrupt country, we want a corrupt free Sri Lanka? Nobody is there. I mean, I can say SJB, we've been talking about it. Mrs. Ajit Premadas actively has given the authority to the Samagi lawyers, the Samagi young lawyers, to work towards, building up the relevant regulations and to work with the authorities. So the leaders who sit in these particular positions must have the mindset, because we're not going anywhere as a country. I mean, to this date, the reason for what we are is corruption. That is undoubtedly, it's corruption. It's the corrupt officials, not just the politicians, but you take the government sector, the government servants, everybody. It's all about, bribes, not getting the things done the right way.
When you say everybody, I think there needs to be a small caveat there, because
sorry, I will say, not everybody. I take it back. I mean, officials. People who are in this particular positions. I mean, this is a fact which we know. How do we come out of this? So who is going to fix the system? This is what people say, we need the system change. What is the system change we're talking about? System change is law enforcement authorities doing what they're supposed to do, and also the political machinery not interfering. So this whole difference in terms of, bringing the state to function as it is, and how to distance the politicians needs to come in. And then the whole fact of asset declarations, campaign financing regulations, these need to come into place, and especially campaign financing regulations before the next election should be brought in to curtail election spending. So that is, we know election spending is when they are in office, then they try to recover back to go for the next election, and then it leads to welfare politics in this country when it comes to an election where they go on about distributing. Whose money are they distributing? So this whole thing, the present political culture, the system, everything is interlinked. So I think the time has come in this country to take somewhat of a clean slate and to see how we want to build Sri Lanka from this point onwards. It is to bring in the necessary regulations, the laws, empowering the law enforcement authorities, and to distance the politician from the government sector and the enforcement authorities, I would say.
Shana?
So I have a two-part question. I'll pose the first part to Mr. Navaratnam and the second to Ms. Gunaratna. The first part is, like you posed in your opening statement, you said international cooperation was essential, and Nigeria is an apt case study. They managed to recover $320 million in stolen assets last year, and international cooperation was essential in identifying, tracing the assets, freezing the assets, and returning them. And as a signatory of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, like you mentioned, Sri Lanka is responsible to cooperate with the international organization. They are bound to cooperate with the World Bank, with STAR, Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative. Keeping this in mind, we know that a few weeks ago at the UNHRC, our delegation staunchly refused any hybrid mechanisms. They refused international truth-seeking mechanisms, legal procedures into investigating economic crimes. So how can we proceed with asset recovery, being this resistant to international cooperation?
Yeah, so that is exactly the point. That is exactly our difficulty. So you become a signatory to the international conventions, and you make the vows before the international communities and these international organizations. These are not things which you can take so lightly. If you make a vow before the international community, then you must keep up with your word. And first of all, you become a signatory. In terms of our law, that you are, next step is to go before the parliament to have the necessary the acts being implemented to the system. Now here is a case, you become a signatory, you say we have just signed, and the second step, they don't want to do it. So who are the people who have to do it? And there are people who have so many allegations have been made against some of the members in the parliament. So they are the people who have to basically pass the legislation, and they have to raise their hands, they have to give their yes to it. And would they do it? No. So that is the tumbling block that we are facing now. So that is why I was quite categorical. As you correctly said, when it comes to international cooperation in terms of these UN conventions, first of all, you must identify the asset you must freeze it, and the legal the procedure must be initiated, then you must recover it and bring it back to the country, and it shall be given to the people from whom it was stolen. So that is the procedure, as she said, and it's a very complicated procedure. When you have a complicated procedure that is to be put into practice, then of course a proper legal framework must be put in place. So that was my concern. That is what I was just trying to agitate, just as a lawyer. I don't want to make any other statements with regard to that. So therefore that unless and otherwise that we raise our voice on daily basis perhaps, and to put pressure on the decision makers to have a proper system. Perhaps, as she said, we are just asking for the system change, and the time has come. This is the time. We can't wait for another long period of time. So this framework must be put in place. So that is why the public is agitating. It has never happened before to such extent. Perhaps, that's why I said like we keeping too much of reliance of political authority will not work. So then when you have the system in place, the system must take the course. Now here we said with the amendment to the Constitution, and certain powers were given to the bribery and corruption, that commission. And thereafter what happened? It was amended. The powers were taken back. So who are the people who went and raised their voice and give their consent for the amendment of the Constitution? It is the members of the Parliament. So again, they will come before the people and seek the mandate again to go back to the Parliament. So we are the people, who are, directly or indirectly making this contribution. So therefore, these things will have to be properly scrutinized. We will have to analyze it properly. And of course, perhaps the media institutions, perhaps the civil society, the people who are actively involved in these matters will have to conduct these awareness programs and to keep the general public also informed. Because end of the day, it is their life and future which is at stake. That's why the Shalan in his opening remarks, he said, people are finding very difficult to provide their 3 meals. So that is the state of this country now. If that is the case, can we wait for a long period of time? No. So that's why my personal opinion that though there are so many statutes in place have been passed by the Parliament, but that is basically that the power is insufficient to properly investigate into these matters and to find the proper solutions. The classic example where she said that a complaint has been made to the commissioner, the bribery commission, and it has not yet been investigated. And if I'm not mistaken, there are thousands of complaints that have been made to the bribery commission, which I do not know the mechanism, the number of things. I don't have that as statistics now, but they say it is in the public domain. People, day in and day out, they say there are thousands of complaints which are not being investigated. No proper legal procedures have been initiated before the court of law. But the commissioners, perhaps the commissioners or the officials are in place, they are holding their office. So then if we have a system where in case if they don't discharge their public duty, what is conferred on them in terms of the statute, certainly there must be laws to hold them accountable. If they can be held accountable for the actions or the inactions which they do, or otherwise discharging their public duty, certainly things will fall in line. So that is what, just as a professional, I want to basically bring it to your notice and to agitate and to make make this statement, so that when you have this the laws in place, certainly we can have some hope, at least perhaps a few years down the line.
Thank you for your response, Ms. Navaratna. My second question is posed to Ms. Sankita Gunaratna. On the topic of asset recovery, it's the question that the entire nation would want to ask you as well. And it's basically in the last 5 to 6 years, we have taken massive loans in billions and touching up to trillions, all in the name of vanity projects, right? So the question is, where has the money gone? Because it's definitely not gone into vanity projects. Not even the wealthiest countries in the world allocate this much funding for highways and bridges. So where has the money gone? And what is the process of tracing the money overseas? Is there a paper trail?
I'm afraid there's no clear answer to that. In order to be able to trace where the money has gone, we need to have a proper law enforcement system in place. So, for example, say, in your example, say a highway is being built and money is stolen out of that. What needs to happen then? If you put yourself in the place of a corrupt official or a corrupt politician, if you will, or normal person who wants to hide their assets, it needs to be laundered, right? You need to make it look like it's legitimate funding so that you can spend it. So then what usually happens is they can create a vehicle through which you can expatriate the assets. And these are done with the advice and enablement of lawyers, of financial advisors, of real estate agents, of car salespeople, vehicle salespeople. So this is how it's done. So the money is converted usually into something else, or it can be done through a trust or through layering of company ownership. So a good system that can catch this would have regulations to require all of those people, say the service providers who will help a corrupt person, to question a person who comes with a huge bag of money as to where the source of the funding is. And if it is suspicious, that say professional who's supposed to provide that legal service or financial service should refuse to provide that service. And we should have a law enforcement system that not only has these regulations but also enforces them. Say the corrupt person puts that money into a bank account and it's an amount of say 1.5 million rupees. Usually in Sri Lanka, as per the Financial Transactions Reporting Act, I think it's an unofficial threshold of 1 million that is usually used. If a deposit of that amount is made into a bank account, usually whether it is a private bank or a state bank, they would raise a suspicious transactions report with the Financial Intelligence Unit of the central bank. Now, the Financial Intelligence Unit then can take that issue up and refer it to law enforcement, who would then take action to trace the assets. What was the source of the funding? That's before the money leaves the country. Now, if by some means the money has left the country, then you would need to cooperate with those jurisdictions. So you will have to trace the money through their banking and financial system to see where it went. So often we find money and assets stolen from countries like Sri Lanka end up in very advanced jurisdictions as well as these offshore secrecy jurisdictions. Now, why the advanced jurisdictions? On the one hand, it is because it is often prestigious to own a London property or a New York property or a Sydney property. In the same way, as much as we talk about corruption in countries like ours, we feel it a lot more because it happens in the public service, public sector, and we have to confront it a lot more often. But a lot of Western jurisdictions also benefit from corruption, and their economic systems are indeed set up on the proceeds of corruption from kleptocratic nations. So they benefit from it. So it gets very difficult then to trace assets and to trace proceeds of crime and repatriate that. Now, I think Sanitha, you asked the question before of how much time it takes, and we have said 10 years, even when there are cooperating law enforcement agencies. It is not often the case, and in Sri Lanka we know an average criminal case takes 10 years from start to end and 7 more if you add appeals. Now, we are talking about 10 years in cooperating states where you're not taking that much time in the local portion. Take, for example, the Pandora Papers. Right now, this has been a hot topic. It's been more than a year since the story of the Pandora Papers broke. Now, with the Pandora Papers, what they did was to reveal a whole bunch of money that has been cashed abroad. Now, we can't determine yet whether the source of the funding is actually corrupt. Now, that's what we need to do. if we have found money belonging to Sri Lankan politicians abroad, then we need to check, we have to trace back from that to look at the asset declaration locally, right? So we have requested, as TISL, we have requested the asset declaration of the relevant individuals. Now, if we could have that in hand, then we could verify whether the money that has been discovered or exposed through the Pandora Papers has actually been declared locally. If it hasn't, what does that mean? Then it gives rise to a very legitimate suspicion that it could be illegally gained, illegal enrichment, illicit enrichment. So it's, as I said, it's a complicated process, but it's possible to do. But what we need to do politically and in terms of law enforcement is to set in motion the correct steps. Now, these are not politically popular things to do, because if you can't reap the benefits within one electoral cycle, you would not get the executive or input usually or action immediately. But what we need to see, even for electoral benefit, is for action to be taken now, so that you can kind of attest to your voters as well as politicians and the politically elected governments as well, that you're willing to take the hard steps, whether it is against those within your ranks or otherwise.
Sankita, just for the benefit of our audience, how can we use, there are international initiatives that can help us in a situation like this, the Global Forum on Asset Recovery and the Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative. How can we use these initiatives to repatriate?
So unfortunately, both those processes need to be set in motion by the executive. Neither STAR nor the Global Forum on Asset Recovery can act without the political will of the origin state. Now, I know there was a conversation happening about how the Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative can come in and help recover assets if we have 1 million people sign a petition. We know, we've been in touch with the Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative. We were part of the Global Forum on Asset Recovery in DC when it happened in 2017. These processes they're not divorced from the political process. So as I said, out of those 4 routes, there is political will needed for the first route of recovering assets through our law enforcement working with other law enforcement. The other routes have to be initiated by foreign jurisdictions in which the assets are currently placed.
Thank you very much, Sankita. If I can just move our final question to the General Secretary of the Sri Lanka, I beg your pardon, the Samagga Jana Balawegaya Lawyers Federation. We recently saw the National People's Power Movement come up on stage. They had a whole bunch of files. There were many media personalities present. There were other political representatives as well. They asked people to come and pull out files, and then they read out different corrupt activities. They said that many of these files have been given to the Bribery Commission. Cases have been filed, but nothing has happened. Then there was a backlash, of course, from the politicians who were named in these files. All of them came out and said, I'm going to file a defamation case, I'm going to sue you, I'm going to sue you, I'm going to sue you. It's been quite a while, but nobody has really sued. So at least something is happening from that point. What is the Samagga Jana Balawegaya Lawyers Federation, or the Samagga Jana Balawegaya, doing right now to address this massive issue that has bankrupted our country?
Yes, now for example, now 2 weeks back, there was a gazette notification by the President to declaring high security zones. So we have gone before the Supreme Court and we have petitioned the Supreme Court. After within 48 hours, the President has reversed the gazette. So likewise, now our leader, he has called all the lawyers of the Samagga Jana Balawegaya, the key members, 1 month ago, and we have actually planned how to meet this situation. And what the Jathika Jana Balawegaya did was just a political media show. So suppose if they have lodged complaints in the Bribery Commission, or they have a complaint to the CID, if they have not investigated. So now they are the virtual complainants to the CID as well as the Bribery Commission, it seems. So if they have not taken up proper steps, what they would have done was, they would have gone before the Court of Appeal by way of a writ, and they would have asked the Attorney General and the officers concerned to investigate it and bring the culprits before the law. So they have, for last, almost 7 years, they have not done so. So that means it's just a media show.
So you're still faulting them. So if there is a person with a complaint against a public official, just going and complaining to the authority is not enough.
That's what I said.
That's not enough.
That's not enough. So they have not done so. They have not done so. On the other hand, actually we are the Samagi Lawyers Federation as well as the Samagi Young Lawyers. So they have gone before the relevant authorities and we have checked it with them, and our next step would be we will go before the court by way of writ.
Sir, since of course you're the General Secretary of the Samagi Jana Balawegaya Lawyers Federation, what plans are there? There was much discussed here on setting up a mechanism. I know this of course cannot be addressed within a few minutes, but at what stage is the planning at least in establishing a proper mechanism? Do you have a draft? Is it still a work in progress? Around when can you at least give us an indication of what will be done?
Yes, actually we are at the planning stage, because without the power you can't do anything. Only thing is we have to go to courts and get the order of court, whether it's a Supreme Court or the court. Supreme Court, if you have to, if it is so, you have to go by way of a fundamental right case. In the Court of Appeal, you have to go by way of a writ application. So we did, that's why I gave you the example. And in other matters, we are actually preparing to go before the Court of Appeal by way of writs. And at this stage, I can't reveal all these facts because it's under planning.
Right. Thank you very much to all our panelists. Of course, that brings to a close the round for journalists to pose question to our panelists. Up next is the final round of Face the Nation. But before that, a short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Face the Nation.
ජනසිත් ශක්තිමත් කඳුළු බලවත් දුප්පත් උනත් නැගිටින්න සම දශකයක් පුරා මේ මිනිස්සුන්ට ජීවන විශ්වාසය දුන්නේ ගම්මැද්ද රට නගන ජන පෞර පැතිකඩ නිදහස්ව ඇහැරෙන්න අදහස්.
මත්ද්‍රව්‍ය හෝ මත්පැන් විකුණන පුද්ගලයා මේකෙන් අයින් කරගත්තන් පස්සේ මෙයාට ජීවිතය ගෙනිය ගන්න වෙන විකල්පයක් නැහැ.
පාර්ලිමේන්තුව අපිට එපා, മന്ത്രിවරු අපිට එපා කියන සංකල්පයට අපිට යන්න බෑ. රටකට පාර්ලිමේන්තුවක් තිබිය යුතුයි. කවුරු හරි മന്ത്രിවරු පිරිසක් ඉන්න ඕනේ.
තාම පල්ලෙහා මිනිසාගේ ඉඳන් හොරකම් කරන රටක් මේක. ඒක පුරුදු කරපු රටක්. ජනශ්‍රුතියෙන් පවා අපි හොර ජාතියක් වෙලා තියෙනවා.
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 10:00ට TV1 ඔස්සේ. වැටුණු තැනින් නැගිටින ජීවන විශ්වාසය ගෙයින් ගෙට මෝදුකොට ජන මන පිබිදු ගම්මැද්ද දුක් විඳින ශ්‍රී ලාංකිකයින්ගේ සිත් අවදි කරන සොයන් විප්ලවය ගම්මැද්ද රට නගන ජන පවුල
කියවන්න, ඉක්මනින් තේරුම් ගන්න. ඉක්මනින් එන News First News Alert සිංහලෙන්ම පළමු වරට SLT මොබිටෙල් ජංගම දුරකථනයට RAG 30ක් NSL ලෙස ටයිප් කර 2244ට සෙන්ඩ් කරන්න.
ලක්ෂ 220ක ජනතාවටම ප්‍රවෘත්ති කියන 20000 බලකායට එක්වන්න.
News First, you report.
ඔබ දුටු දේ ඔබම කියන්න. ලියාපදිංචියට 0770යි 73යි 15යි 19ට ඔබේ නම WhatsApp කරන්න.
Welcome back. You're watching Face the Nation. This is the final round of Face the Nation where our discussion throughout the first and second rounds will be summarized and the closing statements of the panelists will be presented, of course. First opportunity will go to the Attorney at Law Sudath Vikramaratne, the General Secretary of the Samagijana Balavegya Lawyers Federation. Sir, much has been discussed during this program on the recovery of assets. I think we've got a very good lecture on this subject from Sankita. Thank you very much, Sankita. Sir, on what a commonality of every sentiment that was uttered on this program today was the lack of political will to recover stolen assets. I think everybody in Sri Lanka will also attest to this fact. How do you plan on changing this? Do you think the Samagijana Balavegya has enough political will? Your time starts now.
Yes. In fact, the leader of the party, Ms. Sajith Premadasa, wanted the advice of the lawyers about this. And our proposal was, first, we must get back the 19th Amendment in force, where the Independence Commission should be established. And our view was the commissioners of the bribery commission should be not retired persons, but judges, sitting judges from the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeal, and they have the authority. And this commission should be established to the Constitutional Council, and honest, independent persons should be appointed. Not only that, the Director General of the Bribery Commission and his officers should be a separate cadre, like the judicial officers. And the cases over 10 million or so should be tried by the trial at bar, or the judges comprised with 3 High Court judges. And the COP and COPA should be given more power. Not only the directions, they can direct the people concerned, persons concerned or the officers concerned to make complaints to the CID or the relevant authorities. And especially the proper investigation should be done, and the officers should be given proper authority, especially the police and the bribery commission. So those are the proposals we put forward to the honorable leader, and he accepts that. So what we need is a clean country without corruption, and actually I understand the best country in the world, we can get examples from Hong Kong. There should be a public prosecutor, not the Attorney General. Not the Attorney should handle these bribery cases, but separate prosecutor should handle these cases. He may be either Director General of the Bribery Commission or some other person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sudath Vikramaratne, Attorney at Law, General Secretary of the Samagijana Balavegya Lawyers Federation. Up next, Lihini. You were quite vocal during the show regarding the recovery of assets. We've got many questions, of course, from the general public, but many of those were not questions. They were just, they were the sentiment of the public. They were statements made by the public, and those statements helped me get a feel of how the people who are watching this show right now really feel about the situation that the country is in. Lihini, there were messages that we received saying that it's not only politicians who are corrupt, like you said, it's not only officials who are corrupt. The people themselves have a certain element of corruption among them. Corruption is embedded into the Sri Lankan culture in a way. So on this front, what really is your reading on how we can move forward? Because now we are stuck. This is like quicksand. We keep going down. What do you think we should do?
So I speak as a citizen, as a young politician, I would say, and also as a representative of people who were involved in the struggle. I think for Sri Lanka to take a step or to come out of this particular catastrophe that we are in, the economic crisis that we are in, we need to take corruption away. This whole corrupt mindset from the people, from the officials, from the politicians, that needs to take away. For that, a few things. The political will needs to be in place, especially starting from the executive. The executive must drive the agenda. We no longer can be in a country where the corrupt officials and the corrupt politicians are protected. It is, at the end of the day, these all people's money, state assets. These all belong to the people, not to a politician or a government or a regime that comes for a short period of time. What they have done throughout the years has robbed our future, robbed our futures, our younger generation's future, and people are leaving this country, and all of it boils down to this whole fact of corruption. Corruption at any way, at any forms, even when it comes to putting a kid to the school, there is corruption. To getting your road constructed, there's corruption. Even the basic things, even to get petrol those days, that was corruption. Everywhere it's corruption. In the basis in this country for anything is corruption, and one of the factors of that is also the systems are never in place. You can't get anything done the right way because the mindset is, if you want something, even you go to land registries to get a file, to get a document, everything is bureaucratic. Everything there is red tape. There is no technology that has been introduced. So it is not for the benefit of the people. So the whole system, I would say, needs to change, and we need to think afresh. To do all these things, sadly, it all boils down to the politician, and the politician who is a legislator who sits in that parliament. They have to be, at the end of the day, they have to be accountable to the people. They must do the right thing by the people. We have not had individuals in this country, we have not had leaders in this country, we have not had honest people in this country governing us. That is why we are in this particular, sadly to say, at every level, be it, I'm not trying to, say certain factors of this country are clean, but you get at every level people are corrupt. We need to get out of that corrupt mindset. Taking bribes is not the way to go. Even young people, if you are, as much as giving a bribe, taking a bribe, both are wrong. We don't have that culture in this country where where you say wrong is wrong. We don't have the culture of calling a spade a spade. We always try to cover up. That's why we are in this situation. So, so many factors contribute to this disaster that we are in. Even the people, the government officials, do not only blame the politician, but blame yourselves. You look at yourselves. People watching this, they themselves can question, how have I got my things done through the right way, or have I got it done through a shortcut by paying something, tipping off?
But Lihini, if you just said that there is no proper way, or a person can't get anything done through a proper way.
Yeah.
So if there is no way to get it done through the proper way, the only option that person has is get it done some other way, or don't get it done.
No, it is to question the people. It is you go to the official, and if they are not assisting you, you question them. Don't give the bribe. If you don't give the bribe to your garbage collector, if you go to the Pradesh Sabha office and if they're not assisting you, do not give the bribe. Question them. We are the taxpayers. Now the taxes in this country have been increased, and we pay taxes because we have to get that due service from the government, and if that is not happening, question them. Why can't we have that mindset in this country?
Really, for so long, people really didn't feel taxes because, well, taxes in Sri Lanka were quite low.
Yes.
Now we are kind of feeling taxes. I think a person who earns about 750,000 rupees would have to roughly pay about 200,000 rupees in taxes alone. A considerable amount. Do you think the people will feel more, question more, try to do things the right way more now that, they feel it?
See, the fact here is it's not that taxing is not that taxing is wrong. Taxing should happen. That is the way the government must earn the revenue. But then the government at the end of the day is responsible to use that tax money in a responsible way. It should not be the fact of, the politician getting a 10% or 20% bribe or a cut of it. That is the culture that has been happening in this country. So that needs to be reversed. So to reverse it, it just can't be only the politician or the law enforcement authorities or the police or the CID. This whole, we as a country, we need to understand that what has drawn us down to this situation, and we must rise above it. Even to your politicians, I mean, we need to have that culture of rejecting the wrong politicians. If the politician at the end of the day, if we know that they are corrupt, why vote them in? Why? Because they are getting you that job, because they have helped you get that contract, because if they are there and I know you, I can get my way through. That is the mindset. Because we want that position, because we want that government top-notch position. This is why we are in this country. We cannot call a spade a spade. If we don't do this, if the young people, this is why the young people in this Aragalaya are fighting and talking. Their rights are legit, I mean, their causes are genuine, but the politicians are not hearing. So I think, we talk and talk of it, and it has come to a peak. And either it will take its course, or Sri Lanka will go off a different direction. But I hope it doesn't happen, because the people in that parliament, the executive, the present president, who is a lawyer himself, he can do this. If he has the political will, if he has a need, he can do this. Politicians in that parliament, they are honest people. They can vote for the right legislature. Why aren't they doing that? They can bring in private member bills. They can talk of these factors. They can champion these causes. Why aren't they doing that? So that is, we must hold our politicians and everybody accountable. Accountability, transparency is the way to go for this, and say no to corruption. Should be, I think, that if we can create that mindset in this country, I think for us to come out of this crisis, it will not be a dream, it will be a reality, but everybody must work together to make it happen.
Lini, one final addition. This, of course, was not discussed during the course of the program, but I just want your take on this because you were seen at the Aragalaya as well. You were part of these discussions on how to recover stolen assets and change the country. The leader of the former government that was ousted by the Aragalaya, that was forced to resign actually by the Aragalaya, made a statement recently saying that even the Aragalaya can only, burn things down, do things undemocratically, and if an election is held right now, they are confident that they can win. What do you think?
See, there should be a limit to hoodwinking the people, no? I mean, at the end of the day, who is responsible for this particular economic crisis? Why are we suffering? Why did we have the gas strikes, why, gas shortages, the petrol shortages, these power cuts, the unprecedented amount of taxes that we are? Who is responsible for it? Who put us into this misery? Who is responsible? The people need to question. So even if those politicians come on those stages and say, even if we have the next election, we will win, I think it's time for the people in this country to look at things in a much smarter way and reject the wrong people. If we don't do that, I mean, at the end of the day, it says, people get who they deserve. So this particular situation that we are in, is it something that we deserve? But who is responsible? We need to put the people who are responsible out of office. I mean, that should be the name of the game. And if the people are not wise enough to do that, God bless Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much, Lihini Fernando, Samagi Janabala Vegia, member of the Moratuwa Municipal Council. I now move my attention to Sankitha Gunaratne, Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. Sankitha, international cooperation is needed for Sri Lanka. There was a time when Sri Lankan politicians used to say, no IMF, no international cooperation, we know how to do this, we can find a local solution, but those ideas are out the back door. As far as Sri Lanka's image goes, and since your organization is linked to international organizations, Sri Lanka has been accused now of economic crimes at the United Nations General Assembly, a resolution passed to that effect. What do you see in the near to short-term future for Sri Lanka as far as international cooperation goes? Do you think we have a good shot? Are we going down the right road?
I think there are not going to be popular solutions at this point. If you look at what the IMF is asking for, it's looking at whether Sri Lanka will get its corruption problem under wraps. Will it increase revenue? Will it be able to restructure its debts? These are the questions that the IMF is asking. So I can't speak to the second and third questions, but on the issue of corruption, I think what we need to see immediately is we enable law enforcement, right? We do have laws in place that are completely sufficient to take enough action on corruption that can reinstate faith in the system. We have a Bribery Act, we have a CBOC Act, that's a Bribery Commission Act, we have an asset declaration law, we have procurement procedures, right? We have all of these things in place. We have an asset declaration law that requires public officials, senior politicians to make their asset declarations available to law enforcement. So even, I mean, we have pushed for public declarations of assets, but even that is necessary because of the failure of law enforcement. So if we have law enforcement that is properly divorced from the political, I think we can go a long way. So right now we have a problem of misaligned incentives. We have a political infrastructure that seems to be in a context of state capture, which seems to not want to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that corruption is happening within as well as without their ranks. So if you're not willing to look within, we cannot make strides in the fight against corruption. So if we are to solve this problem, true, it's good to have new laws. There is a new law that is just around the corner. We're being told that there is going to be a composite law on anti-corruption. We have received a draft just a couple of months ago, but no deliberation has been done, no public consultation has been done. There have been certain experts working on it, but other critical stakeholders, including ourselves to a certain extent, have been kept out of the process. So the solution right now is not to rush through new pieces of legislation to placate international audiences, but to take law enforcement very seriously right now, even in the absence of new laws. However, we know that the 20th Amendment dealt a massive blow on the infrastructure of law enforcement in this country, on the independence of law enforcement from the executive. So we know there is a 22nd/21st Amendment around the corner as well, but that also in its current form doesn't provide for enough independence of the Constitutional Council that can then in turn assure the independence of all these other law enforcement agencies. So we need to get this right. We can't be tinkering around with laws to placate different audiences without really getting it right, at least now, when there has been such a massive public demand for change. Of course, we must acknowledge that the public itself needs to, as Lihini very clearly said, take account of their own complicity in the problem. If we keep voting wrong, if we keep not asking the right questions from our candidates, if we keep not holding them accountable, then we can't expect them to act in an accountable manner. So it really also boils down to our culture of whether we accept it when it comes to us and just point fingers at others when you're really being hit by corruption. So from the smallest decision that is within your control, if you're not refusing to be corrupt in that instance, I know there is a cost to refusing to be corrupt in Sri Lanka, but if we don't start then, we will constantly have everyone making the same calculation and free riding on this problem of corruption. We all need to collectively stop in order to be able to have impact. If not, everyone will just keep breaching the ranks and getting ahead for themselves and not for the entire nation.
Sankita, one final question. You said that Sri Lankans, with regard to the issue of corruption, that the international community is looking at how Sri Lanka deals with the issue of corruption. Specifically, you said that the IMF is looking at how Sri Lanka deals with the issue of corruption. Well, we all know that Sri Lankans have been hoodwinked for the longest time with these small tinkerings in laws, with these new introductions, with these massive speeches. But do you think the international community will buy in?
That is a political calculation, I'm afraid. I hope not. I hope, I mean, it's difficult, right? It's difficult to say that the IMF or anyone else should stop giving aid to a country that desperately needs that. That is certainly not what we would wish for. But at this point of time, in the negotiations, they have the choice of prioritizing things that are in the best interest of the people. Because we are not, this is not merely about an imperialist agenda, you know. It is about whether the money, even that the IMF brings in, will be given to the victims of this economic crisis. Will it be pilfered away? Will it be re-corrupted? So these are actual, they have real life consequences beyond the political machinations of this specific issue. So I certainly hope that these issues can be prioritized in these negotiations in the best interest of the Sri Lankan public, majority, minority, whoever it is, so that the resources coming into the country can be used for those most desperately in need.
Thank you very much, Sankitha Gunaratne, Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. Last and certainly not least, he got the first go in the opening round. We have Attorney at Law Kaushalya Navaratne, former Secretary of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Sir, you are a member of a prestigious professional organization in Sri Lanka. Professionals came forward when Sri Lanka needed them the most in previous instances as well. As a professional, what do you think that professional organizations in Sri Lanka, or how do you think professional organizations in Sri Lanka could contribute to solving this issue of corruption? You could use lawyers maybe as a case on point. Your time starts now.
Yeah, thank you, Shalan. Now, if you look at it, yes, we as lawyers, we as professionals, we have given our contribution in certain ways, in certain aspects, just to as and when it was mostly demanded and requested for. Certainly now, if you look at the sentiments that were expressed by all the panelists, all what they are crying for is a corruption-free society, corruption-free country, the country which is good enough for all the citizens to live happily. Now the issue is, when you look at the whole sentiments in totality, what is the issues that are facing, what are the impediments, and what are our politicians doing, and will they do enough to meet the present day demands? The analysis and my reading is that they will not do enough unless and otherwise that we insert and impose more pressure on them. So that is what is needed. And certainly yes, and so many things, sentiments were expressed with regard to the existing the laws in the country. But it has not brought the sufficient or rather the enough results to the nation. The nation is facing these the difficulties, notwithstanding the fact that the laws were inexistent for a long period of time. So that was one of the reasons as to why, in my opinion, that the new laws must be implemented and the law enforcement authorities must be given enough powers for them to act independent to the political the leaderships. So that is what is extremely important. So it is, yes, and there are political leaders, perhaps if they have the will, they can do it. But if you analyze their past conduct and the manner in which they conduct themselves now, it seems that they don't have much of a will to meet and to regularize and to bring these matters to a final conclusion. So in my opinion, it is ultra important that the general public must get more educated on these matters, and as and when they have a chance to raise their voice, they must raise their voice against these matters, and to see to it that there will be a proper system in place which will be good enough for you and people like you and I also to live happily.
Mr. Navaratne, just one more question arising out of what you just said right now. You said it's imperative that people continue to exert pressure Of course, that's one way that we can ensure democracy works here in Sri Lanka, because, of course, for the foreseeable future, elections are a long time coming. There are no elections that have been announced. Highly unlikely that any elections might come in the near future. So on this point of exerting pressure, how do you reckon people exert pressure? Because there were certain ways, by way of protest, by way of silent protests even, but as time passed by, now standing with a candle at Galface Green would end up in that person being thrown into prison and the candle being produced in court as an item that was intended to cause damage to state property. People are scared, people are worried. They don't want to go through all of that, or at least wish that they can spare the suffering and exercise their right. How do you reckon people work their way around this and exert pressure?
Yeah, all the authorities that they do this type of matters, and taking a person into custody for holding a candle in a public place. If you go through the principle enunciated in the case of Janagosha matter, that will give you the answer. Most of these officials, especially the people who are enforcing the so-called law and order in the country, they must get themselves educated with regard to the pronouncements of the Supreme Court. There are rights which have been guaranteed by the Constitution for the citizens. And the people, they must have the freedom of expression, and it can't be suppressed, and it's a fundamental right. Of course, there are limitations in the Constitution itself, but as far as the public agitations are concerned, and it has not happened only during the last 6 months. These issues have been a kind of perennial situations. The precarious situations has brought down this country to this level. So the suppression of the expressions of people with the passage of time, certainly those the authorities will have to pay a huge penalty before the court of law. So therefore, I'm giving this signal, like when you try to suppress the opinions of people in this manner, certainly that will give rise to another cause of action for the aggrieved parties to seek relief from the appropriate the court of law.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Kaushalya Navaratna, former Secretary of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, for joining us on our show and expressing your views on this very important matter. Thank you very much, Sankitha Gunaratna, Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka, for joining us tonight. Thank you very much, as always, Lihini Fernando, Municipal Councillor of the Morato Municipal Council from the Samagi Jana Balawegaya. Thank you very much, the General Secretary of the Samagi Jana Balawegaya Lawyers Federation, Attorney at Law Sudath Vikramaratna, for joining us on our show and educating the public on this matter of that is being discussed among the people quite broadly these days. Well, much was spoken about the recovery of stolen assets, but it is our duty that we appoint responsible officials who will not steal to begin with. We could spare ourselves the time and discuss on how we can develop the country instead of trying to find who stole what and where they've stashed it. I'd end tonight's show with a quote from His Eminence, Pope Francis, when he said, "Corruption is paid for by the poor." Take care and God bless.